Right now, somewhere, a mother looks at her 8-year-old son and says something she believes is perfectly normal, something her own mother said to her, something that seems utterly harmless. And in that instant, unknowingly, she plants the seed of what Carl Jung would call a core self-esteem injury. She's not evil. She has no intention of hurting. She genuinely believes she's doing her best. And that's exactly what makes it so devastating. Because how do you blame someone who didn't know? How? Do you process anger towards parents who wounded you unconsciously? This is the pain that no one talks about. Jung discovered something disturbing about families. The unconsciousness of parents doesn't protect them from transmitting trauma. In fact, unconsciousness is the very mechanism of transmission. Narcissistic parents don't wound their children despite not knowing. They wound their children precisely because they don't know. And in the next few minutes, you're going to understand how this unconscious process works, why it's more common than we imagine, and why the lack of malicious intent doesn't make the wound any less real. We're going to explore what Jung called the unconscious parental complex, the unintegrated family shadow, and how destructive patterns repeat through entire generations without anyone realizing what they're doing. There's a truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Your parents may have wounded you deeply without having any idea what they were doing, and that truth carries a weight almost impossible to process. Because if they didn't know, can you truly blame them? If they too were wounded, where does understanding end and your own healing begin? Jung spent decades studying families and discovered something that changes everything. Most destructive parental behavior operates completely outside of conscious awareness. It's not malice. It's not conscious cruelty. It's something much more complex and much more difficult to process. It's the unintegrated shadow of the parents projecting onto their children. Its unresolved parental complex is being transmitted as psychological inheritance. And the most disturbing part, it's a cycle that repeats for generations, with each generation genuinely believing they're doing things differently. The reality is this: your parents probably wounded you, and they probably didn't know. And both things are true at the same time. This is the ambivalence that children of narcissistic parents have to live with, the anger mixed with guilt, the validation of the pain, mixed with the understanding that they too were victims. Jung would say that it's in this tension of opposites that true transformation happens. But first, you need to understand how this unconscious mechanism of destruction actually works. Let's meet Emily. She's 34 years old. She's been in therapy for 3 years, trying to understand why she never feels enough, why every accomplishment feels empty, why she systematically sabotages herself when she's close to something good. And then, in one session, her therapist asks a simple question. What did your mother say when you brought home a good grade from school? Emily pauses, thinks, and suddenly, a memory from 25 years ago surfaces with crystal clarity. She was 9 years old. She'd gotten an A+ in math. She ran home, excited, holding the test. Her mother looked, smiled briefly, and said, "That's good, sweetie. Now you just need to keep it up in all your other subjects too. Don't relax just because you did well once." Emily tells this to the therapist, thinking it's a positive example. "See? My mother encouraged me. She motivated me to always improve." The therapist looks at her and asks, "And how did you feel in that moment?" Emily pauses again, and for the first time in 25 years, she allows the truth to emerge. "I felt like the A+ wasn't enough. Like nothing I did would ever be enough. Like I always needed to be more And there, in that therapy room, Emily understands something that changes everything. Her mother wasn't being cruel. Her mother genuinely believed she was teaching resilience, ambition, excellence. Her mother had no conscious awareness that she was transmitting a very different message. You are never enough. You always need to prove your worth. Love is conditional upon performance. Was Emily's mother a narcissist? Probably, but did she know it? Absolutely not. She believed she was a good mother, a demanding mother, yes, but only because she wanted the best for her daughter. And it's exactly this lack of awareness that makes everything so complicated, because Emily spent decades feeling this wound, but without being able to name it. After all, her mother never abused her, never abandoned her, never screamed or publicly humiliated her. She just never let Emily feel that she was enough, and she did it with a smile on her face, and a genuine belief that she was being a good mother. Jung would call this a negative mother complex. And here's what most people don't understand about complexes. They are completely unconscious. Emily's mother didn't wake up thinking about how she could undermine her daughter's self-esteem. She operated on emotional autopilot, repeating patterns that she herself had learned. Because Emily's grandmother did the exact same thing. And Emily's great-grandmother probably did too. It's a psychological inheritance, transmitted through generations, with each generation genuinely believing they're doing the right thing. But wait, because Emily's story is just beginning, and what happens next will reveal something even more disturbing about how parents wound children without knowing it. 3 months after that therapy session, Emily goes to visit her mother. She's now aware of the patterns. She sees the dynamics, and one Sunday afternoon, she observes something she'd never noticed before. Her 7-year-old niece, her brother's daughter, is showing a drawing she made at school to her grandmother. Emily's grandmother, now 62 years old, looks at the drawing, smiles, and says, "That's beautiful, honey. Next time, try to color inside the lines, okay?" Emily feels a chill run down her spine. She has just witnessed, in real time, the generational transmission of the complex. Her mother just did to her granddaughter exactly what she did to her. And the most disturbing part, her mother did it with tenderness. In her voice, with a genuine smile, with apparent love. She genuinely believes she's teaching her granddaughter to strive for excellence. She has no awareness that she's planting the same seed of inadequacy that she planted in Emily 30 years ago. And here's the part that Jung tried to make us understand. This isn't malicious intent. This is unintegrated shadow. Emily's mother carries within herself an unhealed wound from her own childhood. A wound that says, you need to be perfect to be loved. And because that wound was never integrated, never brought to consciousness, it automatically projects onto her children and grandchildren. It's an automatic, unconscious pattern that repeats, generation after generation. Emily sits there, watching her 7-year-old niece try to force a smile, all the while internalizing the message. My best is never enough. And Emily recognizes that forced smile. It's the same smile she learned to plaster on her face at 9 years old. The same smile her mother probably learned to give at 9 years old too. 3 generations of women learning to hide the pain of never being enough. 3 generations of mothers unconsciously passing on the same ego wound. 3 generations where no one intends to cause harm, but everyone ends up hurting. Then Emily does something that will change everything. She decides to confront, not with anger, but with curiosity. She asks her mother, "Mom, Do you remember how Grandma reacted when you showed her your report cards? Her mother pauses, thinks, and after a long silence, she says, "He always said I could do better, that a B was fine, but an A would be better, that I shouldn't settle for mediocrity." "And how did that make you feel?" Emily asks, already knowing the answer. Her mother is silent for a long moment, and then, with a slightly broken voice, she says, "I felt like I was never enough. Like nothing I did was good enough." Emily watches her mother process, perhaps for the first time, at 62 years old, the connection between her own ego wound and her behavior toward her daughter. "Do you realize you did the same thing to me?" Emily asks gently. Her mother looks at her, and for the first time, there's a flicker of awareness, a moment of recognition. "I did?" she asks, genuinely surprised, and here's the crucial moment. Emily's mother wasn't feigning surprise. She genuinely didn't know. For 62 years, she repeated a pattern that deeply wounded her, without ever realizing she was doing the same to her own daughter. Jung would say that this is the power of the unintegrated family shadow. We become what we don't integrate. We repeat what we haven't processed, and we do it without malice, without awareness, genuinely believing we're doing things differently. But there's something even deeper happening here, something that Jung observed in his years of clinical practice, and that will completely change how you understand your parents. Because it's not just that they didn't know, it's that they couldn't know. And understanding this difference is crucial for your own healing. Jung discovered that unconscious parental complexes aren't just learned patterns. They're autonomous psychic structures that operate independently of the conscious ego. In simpler terms, when the complex is activated, the person literally doesn't have access to full consciousness. They enter a kind of psychological autopilot, where they are repeating programmed patterns without the capacity to observe what they're doing. Think about it. When Emily's mother saw her daughter bringing home a good grade, something activated inside her. An unintegrated negative mother complex that said, "Don't let her become complacent. You need to push her toward excellence." This complex came from her own ego wound, from her own unhealed inner child who never felt sufficient. And when this complex was activated, her consciousness diminished. She literally couldn't see that she was hurting her daughter. She could only operate through the complex's script. This isn't an excuse, but it is an explanation. And Jung would say that understanding this mechanism is essential for your individuation, because if you remain stuck in anger against parents who didn't know, you remain emotionally tied to them. But if you can see that they were also hostages of unintegrated complexes, you free yourself, not because you forgive, but because you understand. And understanding brings power. Let's go even deeper. Because there's another aspect of this unconscious process that is even more disturbing, and it has to do with what Jung called projective identification. Emily's mother not only transmitted her ego wound, she unconsciously needed Emily to fail on some level. Why? Because if Emily achieved full success, genuine happiness, emotional self-sufficiency, it would be a painful mirror, showing the mother everything she never had. So, unconsciously, subtly, the mother sabotaged any movement of Emily towards true self-reliance. When Emily, at 16, was accepted into an excellent university, her mother said, "That's wonderful, dear. I just hope you don't go too far away. You know how lonely I get." It sounds like support, but the unconscious message is, your success wounds me. You shouldn't shine too brightly because it abandons me. When Emily, at 28, got a major promotion, her mother said, Congratulations. But don't work too hard, right? You know that a career isn't everything in life. You should be thinking about family too. It sounds like motherly advice, but the unconscious message is, you're going too far. Come back to where I can control you. And here's the most disturbing thing. Emily's mother didn't know she was doing this. If you asked her, she would say with absolute sincerity that she only cared about her daughter, that she wanted the best for her, that she was being a good mother. The shadow operates in the subtext, in the undertones, in the messages that are never said directly, but that the child absorbs on a visceral level. Jung said that the greatest cruelty doesn't happen in what parents do. It happens in what they don't do, and specifically, in the emotional mirroring they fail to offer. Because for a child to develop a healthy self, she needs to be seen. She needs her feelings to be validated. She needs her existence to be recognized as valuable in itself, not for what she produces or achieves. Narcissistic parents, even the unconscious ones, fail in this mirroring. And they fail because no one offered this mirroring to them. Emily's grandmother couldn't see Emily's mother, and Emily's mother, in turn, couldn't see Emily. Not because they were bad people, but because you can't give what you've never received. You can't mirror authenticity if your own true self is buried under layers of adaptation and performance. So, what happens? The child learns that love is conditional, that acceptance depends on performance, that being seen requires being perfect. And in response to this, the child develops what Jung called the false self, a persona built to please, a mask designed to win approval. And the true self, the authentic essence of the child, is buried so deeply that eventually the person forgets it even exists. Emily spent 30 years living through a false self, being the perfect daughter, the excellent student, the competent professional. But inside, there was a void, constant feeling of performing her own life instead of living it. And that's because her true self was never mirrored, never seen, never validated as sufficient simply for existing. And her mother did this knowingly, or rather unknowingly, because her mother did the same thing, and her mother before her. It's a line of flawed mirroring, stretching through generations, with each generation unconsciously transmitting the same ego wound, with each generation genuinely believing they are doing things differently, with each generation unable to see the pattern, because they are operating within it. But here's something that will shift your perspective, something that Jung tried to get us to understand. But that's almost impossible to accept when you're in the midst of the pain. Recognizing that your parents hurt you unintentionally does not diminish your pain, but it also doesn't absolve them of responsibility. There is a third path here, a path that Jung would call integration. Your parents hurt you, that's true. Your parents didn't know they were hurting you, that's also true. Your parents were hurt by their parents, truth. And you have a responsibility not to pass this ego wound on, also true. All these things coexist, and it is in the tension between them that you find healing. Because here's what no one tells you. If you get stuck in anger, you remain a child. If you jump to premature forgiveness, you bypass the pain, and it remains unintegrated. But if you can hold both truths, your parents hurt you, and they were also hurt, you become capable of something that Jung called individuation. You separate from the family pattern. You integrate the unintegrated family shadow. You stop the generational transmission. But how? How do you do this in practice, when the pain is so real and the confusion so great? Here's where Emily's story will reveal something crucial, something that will give you a roadmap, because Emily decided to do something radical. something that would change not only her life, but potentially the lives of the next generations of her family. After that conversation on Sunday, Emily made a decision. She was going to do therapy with her mother, not traditional family therapy, but something that Jung would have approved of, a process of mutual awareness where mother and daughter, together, would explore the unconscious patterns that had shaped their lives. At first, Emily's mother resisted. Why? I'm a good mother. I haven't done anything wrong. And here's the first defense that arises when we confront the shadow: denial. Emily's mother wasn't lying. She genuinely believed she was a good mother, because, in her mind, she never had malicious intent. And without malicious intent, how could there be real damage? But Emily insisted, not with accusation, but with an invitation. Mom, I'm not saying you're bad. I'm saying that we've both been hurt. And I'm saying that we can be the first in our lineage to stop this transmission. Do you want your granddaughter to grow up with the same ego wounds that we carry? And it was that question about her granddaughter that changed everything, because for the first time, Emily's mother saw the pattern, stretching beyond herself. She saw that it wasn't just about her having been a good or bad mother. It was about a family pattern that transcended individuals. It was about something larger, being transmitted through generations. And for the first time, she said, yes. The sessions were brutally honest. And here's what emerged. Emily's mother not only repeated patterns, she carried self-esteem injuries so deep that her own capacity for awareness was compromised. Her grandmother had been even more critical, even more demanding, even more impossible to please. And Emily's mother had spent her entire life trying to be different, trying to be kinder, more present, more loving. And in many respects she was. She never hit Emily, never publicly humiliated her, never abandoned her emotionally in an obvious way. But the core of the pattern remained untouched. The core that said, love is conditional upon performance. And that core was transmitted not in what she did, but in what she didn't do, in the validation that never came, in the mirroring that never happened, in the acknowledgement of Emily as enough that was never offered. And when her mother finally understood this, when she really saw for the first time what she had done, something happened that Emily never expected. Her mother cried for the little girl inside her, who was never enough, cried for the daughter she had hurt, trying to protect her, cried for the generations of women, carrying the same ego wound, all believing they were doing differently, all transmitting the same poison, unknowingly. And it was in that moment of genuine lament, in that moment where the shadow was finally brought to light, that something started to heal, not instantly, not magically, but really and deeply. Because awareness is the first step to transformation. And for the first time in 62 years, Emily's mother was aware. But there's a plot twist here that Jung would have loved, something that will turn everything upside down. Because in the weeks following that session, something unexpected happened. Emily's mother began to have memories that she had repressed for decades, memories of her own childhood that she had buried so deeply that she'd completely forgotten they existed. She remembered being 5 years old and showing a drawing to her mother. Her mother looked at it and said, "Why is the sky pink? Sky is blue, honey. You need to pay attention to the right colors." And in that moment, at 5 years old, she learned that her own perception wasn't reliable, that her creative vision of the world was wrong, that she needed to see things the way adults dictated, not the way she saw them. She remembered being 9 years old and crying because a friend had moved away. Her mother said, "Don't be dramatic. You'll make new friends. Stop crying over small things." And in that moment, she learned that her feelings were exaggerated, that pain was drama, that emotions needed to be controlled and minimized. She remembered being 13 years old and being excited because she had written a poem. Her mother read it and said, "It's pretty, but there are some grammar mistakes here. I'll correct it for you." And in that moment she learned that sharing creativity was inviting criticism, that vulnerability resulted in correction, that nothing she created would be enough without external modification. 60 years later, these memories came back like emotional tsunamis, and with them, the devastating realization: I did exactly the same thing to Emily. I repeated every pattern that hurt me. I became my mother, even swearing I would be different. And here's the crucial Jungian insight. We don't become our parents because we choose to. We become our parents because what is not integrated is compulsively repeated. Emily's mother spent decades trying not to be like her mother. But all that energy was spent on avoiding the obvious behaviors, the open criticism, the humiliation, the harshness. What she didn't see was that the emotional core was identical. The pattern had only become more sophisticated, more subtle, more difficult to name. Jung would say that this is the power of the autonomous complex. It doesn't need your conscious approval to operate. It simply operates. And the more you try to suppress it without integrating it, the more it finds subtle pathways of expression. Emily's mother suppressed the obvious harshness of her mother, but the complex found expression in impossible expectations, in validation that was always withheld, in love that was always conditioned on just one more level of performance. But here's where the story takes a turn that few expect. And it has everything to do with Emily's response when her mother finally understood all of this. Emily could have chosen anger. She could have said, "You see, you wounded me. You've admitted it. Now you need to compensate me for the rest of your life." And that would be understandable. It would even be justifiable, but it wouldn't be individuation. It would be remaining trapped in the complex, just on the other side. Instead, Emily did something radical, something that Jung would recognize as true psychological maturity. She looked at her mother and said, "I forgive you. Not because what you did didn't hurt me, but because I see that you were also hurt. And I choose not to pass that wound on. I choose to be where this pattern ends." But there's a crucial detail here. Emily didn't forgive immediately. She didn't bypass the anger. She spent months processing the pain, feeling the anger, validating her own experience. The forgiveness she offered didn't come from denial. It came from integration. She held both truths. My mother hurt me, and my mother was also hurt. And in the tension between those truths, she found freedom. Jung said that individuation isn't about separating from your parents. It's about integrating the inheritance they gave you, the good and the bad, and then consciously choosing what to pass on. Emily integrated the wound. She recognized it, she processed it, and then she chose not to transmit it. And the real marker of that transformation: 2 years later, Emily had a daughter, and one afternoon her 3-year-old daughter showed her a drawing, a chaotic drawing, full of colors that didn't make sense, lines going in every direction. And Emily looked at that drawing and felt something activate inside her, an impulse to say, "That's cute, honey, but next time try." And she stopped. She felt the complex trying to activate. She felt the pattern trying to perpetuate itself. She felt generations of critical mothers wanting to speak through her. And she consciously chose differently. She picked up the drawing, looked her daughter in the eyes, and said, "This is beautiful. Tell me about it." That was the first time in at least 4 generations that a mother in that lineage offered unconditional validation, no correction, no improvement, no expectation of performance. Just pure recognition of the child's creativity as valid in and of itself. Sounds small? It's enormous, because it's in those micro moments that complexes are transmitted or broken, not in grand gestures, but in 1,000 little moments, where a parent chooses validation instead of correction, presence instead of performance, unconditional love instead of transactional love. And here's what Jung would tell us if he were here. You can't change what your parents did. You can't erase the wounds you received. But you can become aware of them. And awareness gives you choice. Choice gives you power. And power allows you to be where the pattern ends. Your family's history probably contains generations of wounds, transmitted unconsciously. Parents hurting children without knowing. Children growing up and becoming parents who hurt in the same way. Each generation swearing they'll be different. Each generation repeating the same essential patterns under new guises. But you don't have to be just another piece in that transmission. You can be the generation that wakes up, that brings awareness, that integrates the shadow, that stops the inheritance of pain. And to do that, you need to start by recognizing something difficult. Your parents probably hurt you, and they probably didn't know it. And both things are true. They're not malevolent villains, but they're also not innocent. They're human beings operating through unintegrated complexes, repeating patterns they received, transmitting wounds they never healed. And you're the product of those wounds, but you don't have to be a slave to them. Jung would say that the moment you become aware of the wound is the moment you gain power over it. Before that, it controls you. You repeat, you transmit, you hurt others in the same way you were hurt, swearing all the time that you're doing it differently. But with awareness, you gain choice, and with choice, you gain responsibility. Responsibility not just for your own healing, but for breaking the cycle. For being the generation that says, this ends here, I see the pattern, I understand the pattern, and I choose not to perpetuate it. This video has probably stirred up wounds that you've carried for decades. It's probably brought to the surface pain that you've been trying to avoid. It's probably forced you to look at truths about your parents that are difficult to process. And if that's the case, I need to tell you something. This work of bringing awareness to family shadows, this work of revealing patterns that have operated for generations, this work costs, not just in time and research, but in the courage to speak truths that our culture prefers to avoid. Most channels avoid this level of depth because it's uncomfortable, because it challenges cultural narratives, because it forces people to look at their own families with brutal honesty. But if this video has helped you see something that you didn't see before, if it's given you language to name experiences that you couldn't explain, if it's given you a map to start your own process of individuation, then I invite you to click on the Super Thanks button right below. It's not just about supporting the channel. It's about saying these truths about parental narcissism, about generational transmission of trauma, about unconscious complexes. These truths need to be known. Every super thanks is you saying, more people need to wake up to these patterns. More people need to have access to this level of Jungian understanding. More people need to become the generation that breaks the cycle. You're not just a spectator of this video. You're potentially the person who interrupts a lineage of transmitted pain that may be hundreds of years old. You're potentially the first person in your lineage to look at these shadows with full awareness. Be part of those who are bringing light to family dynamics that have operated in darkness for too long. Now, let's get to the most important part. Because understanding that your parents hurt you without knowing it is only half the journey. The other half is, what do you do with that information? Here's what not to do. Don't use this understanding to bypass your pain. Recognizing that your parents were also wounded doesn't erase your own wound. You still need to process the anger, the sadness, the grief for what you didn't have. Carl Jung would be the first to say, feeling the pain completely is essential. Denying it in the name of premature understanding is just another form of dissociation. So first, validate your experience. You were wounded. This is real. Even if your parents didn't know, even if they were wounded too, even if they had good intentions, your pain is valid. Your grief is legitimate. Your anger is understandable. Feel all of it completely. Don't rush this process. But after feeling, after processing, this comes the part of integration. And here's the map that Jung gave us. Observe the patterns. See where you're repeating the same dynamics that wounded you, because you are. Everyone is. Not exactly in the same way. But the emotional core is probably there. Emily discovered that even vowing never to criticize like her mother did, she found subtle ways to withhold validation. She did it with co-workers, with romantic partners, with friends. The complex found expression even when she consciously tried to avoid it. So look in your own life. Where are you withholding validation? Where are you making love conditional? Where are you projecting your own unintegrated ego wounds onto others? These are the questions that hurt to ask, but they are essential. Second step, bring shadow to light. Jung said that the shadow loses power when it's seen. While it operates in the dark, it controls you. But when you name it, when you recognize it, when you say, I see this pattern in me, you gain power over it. Third, practice the opposite of what you received. If you received conditional love, practice giving unconditional love. Start small. Start with yourself. Validate your own emotions. Recognize your own efforts. Accept your own imperfection. And then extend that to others, especially if you have children. Every moment is an opportunity to choose differently. Every time your child brings a drawing, a note, an accomplishment, you have a choice. You can repeat the pattern you received, or you can offer what you wished you had received. Fourth, have compassion, but don't confuse compassion with absolution. You can have compassion for your parents and still hold them accountable. You can understand that they were wounded too, and still recognize that they wounded you. These things coexist. Don't choose only one. Hold both. Fifth, and perhaps most important, seek help. Jung would never say that you can do individuation alone. You need a therapist, an analyst, a guide who can help you see the blind spots. Because by definition, you can't see your own shadow without external help. Emily wouldn't have seen her patterns without therapy. Her mother wouldn't have woken up without that joint session. No one wakes up from the shadow by pure force of will. You need external mirrors. You need someone who can show you what you can't see alone. And finally, be patient. Jung said that individuation is a lifetime's work. You're not going to heal generations of wounds in a weekend. You're not going to integrate decades of complexes in a month. This is slow, gradual, sometimes painful work. But it's the most important work you can do. Because here's the ultimate truth. When you heal, you don't just heal yourself. Jung believed that when an individual integrates their shadow, it has a reverberating effect through generations, backward and forward. You somehow retroactively heal the generations that came before, and you proactively prevent damage to the generations that will come after. Emily healing her ego wound didn't just change her future, it changed the relationship with her mother. It changed the future of her daughter, and in some mysterious way that Jung tried to explain through the collective unconscious, it changes something in the family line itself. As if by bringing light to a pattern, You somehow illuminate the entire line. You are more important than you imagine. Your work of consciousness matters more than you know, because you're not just healing you. You're healing a lineage. You're breaking a cycle. You're being the answer that generations of your ancestors waited for, without even knowing they were waiting. Your parents wounded you without knowing, and that doesn't absolve them, but it also doesn't condemn them to be villains. They were human, wounded humans, operating through unconscious parental complexes, doing the best they could with the limited awareness they had, just like their parents before them. But you now know. You have awareness, and with awareness comes responsibility, the responsibility to be different, not perfect. Jung would never ask for perfection, but conscious, awake, integrating instead of projecting, healing instead of transmitting. You can be where the stream of pain stops. You can be the first generation that wakes up. You can be the person your great-grandchildren thank, without ever knowing why their lives are different. Because you did the work. Because you had the courage to look at the unintegrated family shadow and say, "This stops with me." Now tell me something, and be brutally honest in the comments. Can you see the patterns of your parents in yourself? Time I became my father or mother versus time I managed to be different. Which one are you? And more importantly, are you willing to do the work of really integrating those shadows? Or are you still in denial? Thinking it's enough just to be aware? Comment down below with honesty. How many here recognize their own patterns in this video?